The weekend artisan market buzzed with the energy of a perfect Saturday afternoon. Colorful tents dotted the town square, displaying handmade jewelry, pottery, paintings, and crafts from local artists. Families strolled between booths while children's laughter mixed with the gentle sounds of acoustic musicians performing on a small stage. Near the center of the market, a modest booth displayed an array of beautiful pastries and baked goods. The setup was simple but elegant. White tablecloths, small chalkboard signs with handwritten descriptions, and delicate paper doilies beneath each carefully arranged item. Evelyn Tran stood behind her table, adjusting the placement of her signature macarons one final time. At 28, she had the quiet presence of someone who preferred to let her work speak for itself. Her long black hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a simple beige linen dress that was both practical and professional. This was Evelyn's first time participating in the market's monthly Best of the Borough competition, where local food artisans competed for recognition and the opportunity to be featured in the town's upcoming food festival. She had spent weeks preparing, perfecting recipes that had been passed down from her late mother. Each pastry on Evelyn's table represented hours of careful work. The delicate almond cookies were made from a recipe her mother had written by hand in Vietnamese, which Evelyn had translated and adapted for local ingredients. The miniature fruit tarts showcased seasonal berries, arranged with an artist's eye for color and composition. Other competitors had much larger displays and professional banners advertising their established businesses. Evelyn's booth looked humble by comparison, but her items possessed a quality that drew people closer. Customers who stopped to sample her offerings often returned for full purchases, commenting on flavors they couldn't quite identify but found irresistible. As the judging time approached, Evelyn carefully arranged her submission tray, a selection of her best work that would be evaluated by the panel of local food critics and restaurant owners. Her hands trembled slightly as she carried the tray toward the judging table, but her face remained calm and composed. "Excuse me," called a sharp voice behind her. "I need to speak with you." Evelyn turned to see Victoria Hartwell approaching with an expression of obvious anger. Victoria was the daughter of the owner of Hartwell's Bakery, the largest and most established bakery in town. At 25, she had the confidence that came from growing up in a successful family business, but also the entitlement that sometimes accompanied inherited privilege. "You've stolen our family recipe," Victoria announced loudly enough for nearby competitors and judges to hear. "Those almond cookies are identical to ones my grandmother created 50 years ago." Evelyn blinked in surprise. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. This recipe came from my mother's family. She brought it with her from Vietnam in the 1980s. "That's impossible," Victoria snapped, her voice growing louder and more aggressive. "Our family has been making those exact cookies for decades. You obviously copied our recipe and are trying to pass it off as your own." A crowd was beginning to gather around them. Evelyn felt dozens of eyes watching this public confrontation. She clutched her submission tray more tightly, trying to remain calm. "Victoria, I can show you my mother's original recipe card if that would help clarify." "I don't want to see any fake evidence," Victoria interrupted. "I want you to withdraw from the competition immediately." When Evelyn didn't respond quickly enough, Victoria's anger escalated to a level that shocked everyone watching. "How dare you stand there acting innocent when you're nothing but a thief?" The slap came so suddenly that Evelyn barely had time to register what was happening. Victoria's hand struck her cheek with enough force to make her stumble slightly, and the sound echoed across the suddenly silent market square. Evelyn's submission tray fell from her hands, scattering her carefully prepared pastries across the ground. She stood frozen, one hand instinctively moving to her reddening cheek, staring at the ruined work scattered at her feet. The crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation fell completely silent. Even the background music from the nearby stage seemed to fade away. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then from somewhere in the crowd behind Evelyn, a deep, authoritative voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Who exactly do you think gave you the right to humiliate another person because of your family's social position?" Every head in the crowd turned toward the source of the voice, and the silence deepened as people tried to identify who had spoken with such unmistakable authority and controlled anger. You happened to catch this story while you were where? At home, a cafe, or maybe out in public? Don't hesitate to share, because stories of justice always have a way of spreading, no matter where they begin. Evelyn Tran had built her life around the principle that meaningful work didn't require recognition or fame. She lived alone in a small apartment above what had once been her mother's bakery, a modest storefront that had served the neighborhood's Vietnamese community for 20 years before her mother's death 2 years earlier. The bakery had never been a commercial success in the traditional sense. It was too small to compete with larger establishments, and her mother had always prioritized quality ingredients over profit margins. But it had been a gathering place for immigrants who missed the flavors of home, and a bridge between cultures for neighbors who wanted to try something new. When her mother became ill, Evelyn had made a choice that surprised everyone who knew her. She had been working as a financial analyst for a mid-sized investment firm with a promising career trajectory and a comfortable salary. Her colleagues expected her to arrange for professional care for her mother while continuing her career advancement. Instead, Evelyn had taken an extended leave of absence that gradually became permanent. She moved back home to care for her mother during the final stages of her illness, learning family recipes that had never been written down and absorbing stories about their heritage that might otherwise have been lost. After her mother's death, Evelyn faced another crossroads. The sensible choice would have been to sell the bakery property and return to her finance career. The neighborhood had changed over the years, and the small storefront was probably worth more as part of a larger development than as an operating business. But Evelyn couldn't bring herself to let go of the space where her mother had built a community. She had saved enough money from her previous job to cover basic living expenses for a while, and she decided to try continuing the bakery on a smaller scale. Without the foot traffic that had supported her mother's business, Evelyn had to be creative about finding customers. She started by making small batches of items that she sold at a local farmer's market. Her approach was different from her mother's, where her mother had focused on traditional Vietnamese pastries for the immigrant community. Evelyn created fusion items that appealed to a broader customer base while still honoring traditional flavors and techniques. The work was challenging but rewarding. Evelyn found satisfaction in the careful process of mixing, shaping, and baking that required both technical skill and artistic intuition. Each batch was small enough that she could control every detail, and she took pride in using the highest quality ingredients even when it meant lower profit margins. Her customer base grew slowly but steadily. People who tried her items at the farmer's market began requesting special orders for parties and events. A few local coffee shops started carrying her pastries. Food bloggers discovered her work and wrote enthusiastic reviews about her unique flavor combinations. But Evelyn deliberately kept her operation small. She could have expanded by hiring employees or renting commercial kitchen space, but she preferred working alone. The intimate scale allowed her to maintain the personal connection to her work that had made the bakery meaningful to her mother. Her daily routine was simple and predictable. She woke at 5 a.m. to begin mixing doughs and preparing items for the day's baking. By 8 a.m., she was usually putting the first batches in the oven. The afternoon was spent on decorating, packaging, and preparing orders for delivery. Evenings were often spent in the small apartment above the bakery, reading cookbooks, experimenting with new recipes, or maintaining the careful handwritten records she kept of every batch's ingredients and results. She lived frugally but comfortably, finding contentment in the rhythm of work that connected her to both her heritage and her community. Evelyn's decision to participate in the artisan market competition had not come easily. She generally avoided situations that put her work in direct comparison with others, preferring to let customers discover her items organically. But several regular customers had encouraged her to enter, and she had finally decided that the experience might help her understand how her work was perceived by a broader audience. She had spent weeks preparing for the competition, testing and retesting recipes to ensure they would represent her best work. The almond cookies that Victoria Hartwell had accused her of stealing were among her most treasured items, not because they were particularly complex, but because they carried the most direct connection to her mother's memory. The recipe had indeed been brought from Vietnam by her mother's family, though Evelyn had adapted it significantly over the years. She had refined the almond content, adjusted the sweetness level for American palates, and developed a technique for achieving the delicate texture that customers consistently praised. The accusation of theft had been not just insulting, but deeply personal. These recipes represented her family's history and her own creative development. To have them dismissed as stolen goods felt like an attack on everything she had worked to preserve and build. Standing in the market square, with her cheeks still stinging from Victoria's slap, Evelyn felt a familiar impulse to retreat back to the safety of her small world. The public humiliation reminded her why she usually avoided competitive situations and kept her ambitions modest. But something about the voice that had spoken from the crowd made her hesitate. There had been something in that tone that suggested this moment might become something other than just another reason to hide. The voice that had cut through the market's silence belonged to Henry Graves, though no one in the immediate crowd recognized him. At 52, Henry had the kind of understated presence that allowed him to move through public spaces without drawing attention, despite being one of the region's most successful entrepreneurs. Henry had built Graves Sustainable Foods from a single organic farm into a multi-billion-dollar corporation that supplied high-end restaurants and grocery chains across the country. His success story was well known in business circles: a childhood in poverty, years of struggle as a young farmer, and the gradual building of an empire based on sustainable agriculture and ethical business practices. But Henry's wealth had never changed his appreciation for authentic craftsmanship and genuine quality. He still visited small farms and local markets regularly, not as a business scouting mission, but because he genuinely enjoyed discovering people who were passionate about their work. Henry had been walking through the artisan market when the commotion near the judging table caught his attention. He had initially been drawn by the aroma coming from Evelyn's booth, a combination of almond, butter, and something he couldn't quite identify that triggered a powerful memory from his childhood. When he saw Victoria Hartwell's aggressive confrontation with the quiet young woman behind the modest booth, Henry felt a familiar anger rise in his chest. He had grown up poor in a rural area where people with money and social position often treated working people with casual cruelty. Victoria's behavior reminded him of every entitled person who had ever made his mother feel small or his family feel unwelcome. But it was the moment when Victoria struck Evelyn that transformed Henry's annoyance into something much more serious. Physical violence as an expression of class superiority was something he would not tolerate in any context. After his sharp words broke the crowd's stunned silence, Henry pushed through the gathered people to reach Evelyn, who was still standing frozen with her hand to her cheek, staring at her scattered pastries. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly, his tone completely different from the authority he had used to challenge Victoria. Evelyn looked up at him with surprised eyes. He was tall and lean, with graying hair and the kind of weathered hands that suggested he had done physical work earlier in his life. His clothes were expensive but understated, the kind of quality that spoke of wealth without advertising it. "I'm fine," Evelyn said softly, though her voice shook slightly. "I should clean this up." Henry knelt down and began gathering the scattered pastries, handling them carefully despite their ruined state. "These look beautiful. What are they?" "Almond cookies, from my mother's recipe." Evelyn knelt beside him, trying to salvage what she could. "I know they're probably similar to other versions, but they weren't stolen." "I believe you," Henry said simply, "and I suspect they're not similar to anything else at all." As they worked together to clean up the mess, Henry caught the scent that had originally drawn his attention. It was definitely the almond and butter he had noticed, but underneath those familiar smells was something else. A hint of coconut and perhaps lemongrass that created a combination he had never encountered in American baking. "Would it be possible for me to visit your bakery sometime?" Henry asked as they finished gathering the broken pastries. "I'd like to try these properly, when they haven't been scattered on the ground." Evelyn looked at him with surprise. "You really don't need to do that. I'm sure you were just being kind." "I stopped being kind a long time ago when it comes to food," Henry replied with a slight smile. "I only seek out things that are genuinely exceptional. Something about what you've created here reminds me of flavors I haven't tasted since I was a child." Henry helped Evelyn to her feet and handed her a simple business card with just his name and phone number. "Would you mind if I called you next week to arrange a visit?" Evelyn studied the card, which told her nothing about who Henry was or why he would be interested in her small operation. "Mr. Graves, I should mention that my bakery isn't really a restaurant. It's just a small space where I work alone. I'm not sure it would be worth your time." "Let me worry about whether it's worth my time," Henry said gently. "What matters to me is whether you'd be comfortable with a visit." Before Evelyn could respond, Henry had already begun walking away from the scene. He paused once to look back at Victoria Hartwell, who had been standing speechless since his initial intervention. "Ms. Hartwell," he said in a voice that carried clearly across the now quiet market area, "you might want to consider whether your family's business reputation is worth damaging over a public display of bad character." With that, Henry disappeared into the crowd, leaving Evelyn holding his business card and wondering whether the entire encounter had been as surreal as it seemed. The judging for the competition continued, but Evelyn withdrew her submission since her display items had been destroyed. She packed up her remaining inventory and left the market early, driving home with Henry's business card on the passenger seat and no clear idea of what had just happened to change her quiet Saturday afternoon into something completely unexpected. 3 days after the market incident, Evelyn received a phone call that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her small place in the world. "Ms. Tran, this is Margaret Chen, calling on behalf of Henry Graves regarding your bakery operation." Evelyn nearly dropped the phone. She had looked up Henry Graves after their encounter and discovered that the quiet man who had helped her clean up scattered pastries was actually the founder and CEO of one of the largest sustainable food companies in the country. "Mr. Graves would like to schedule a visit to your bakery if that would be convenient for you. He's also asked me to present you with a business proposal that might interest you." Evelyn's mind raced. "I'm not sure I understand. What kind of proposal?" "Mr. Graves is interested in establishing a small artisan bakery within the corporate headquarters of Graves Sustainable Foods. He would like to offer you the opportunity to operate this bakery under your own brand, with complete creative control over your menu and operations." The offer that Margaret outlined was extraordinary. Evelyn would have access to state-of-the-art kitchen facilities, a guaranteed customer base of over 2,000 employees, and financial backing that would allow her to source the highest quality ingredients without worrying about profit margins. "The arrangement would allow you to maintain your current location as well if you choose," Margaret continued. "Mr. Graves sees this as supporting your existing operation rather than replacing it." After ending the call, Evelyn sat in her mother's old kitchen for nearly an hour, trying to process what she had just heard. The opportunity was exactly the kind of breakthrough that struggling food entrepreneurs dreamed about. It would provide financial security, professional recognition, and the chance to reach a much larger audience. But something about the timing made Evelyn deeply uncomfortable. That evening, she called Margaret back with her response. "Please thank Mr. Graves for his generous offer, but I'm going to have to decline." "May I ask why?" Margaret sounded genuinely surprised. "This is an unusual opportunity that might not come around again." Evelyn had spent hours formulating her reasoning. "I'm grateful for Mr. Graves's interest in my work, but I don't want to accept an opportunity that came about because someone felt sorry for me after a public embarrassment. Ms. Tran, I can assure you that Mr. Graves doesn't make business decisions based on sympathy. His interest in your bakery is based entirely on the quality of your work." "Then why didn't he seek me out before the incident at the market?" Evelyn asked. "Why now, right after he witnessed me being humiliated?" Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Perhaps you should discuss these concerns directly with Mr. Graves. Would you be willing to meet with him?" "I don't think that's necessary," Evelyn replied. "I'm flattered by the offer, but I need to build my business on my own merits, not because someone wants to help the poor girl who got slapped." Evelyn spent the next few days second-guessing her decision. The rational part of her mind recognized that she might have just turned down a life-changing opportunity because of pride. Her savings were running low, her customer base was still small, and she had no clear path to significant growth working alone. But every time she imagined accepting Henry's offer, she felt like she would be admitting that she couldn't succeed without rescue from a wealthy stranger who had taken pity on her situation. A week later, Evelyn wrote a formal letter to Henry, thanking him again for his interest and explaining her decision more thoughtfully. "Dear Mr. Graves," she wrote, "I hope you understand that my decision to decline your offer comes from respect for both of us, not from ingratitude. I believe that the best work comes from authentic motivation, and I want to know that any success I achieve reflects the genuine value of what I create." She continued, "If my bakery grows and thrives, I want it to be because customers seek out what I offer, not because a kind person gave me an opportunity I hadn't earned. I hope you can understand this perspective." Evelyn concluded the letter by inviting Henry to visit her bakery as a customer rather than a potential business partner. I would be honored to serve you the almond cookies that started this conversation, prepared properly in my mother's kitchen. After mailing the letter, Evelyn felt a mixture of relief and uncertainty. She had preserved her independence and integrity, but she had also potentially closed the door on the most significant opportunity she might ever receive. That afternoon, as she worked on a small batch of pastries for her regular weekend orders, Evelyn tried to focus on the satisfaction she found in the careful, solitary work that had sustained her since her mother's death. She had made her choice based on principles that felt important to her. Whether it was the right choice would only become clear with time. Outside her small bakery, life in the neighborhood continued at its usual pace. But Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that her quiet world was about to change in ways she hadn't anticipated. Regardless of what decision she had made about Henry Graves's offer, 1 week after Evelyn's letter declining his offer, Henry Graves published an essay in the Regional Business Journal that would transform how people understood the incident at the artisan market and change Evelyn's life forever. The essay, titled "The Small Cookie That Carried a Lifetime of Memory," appeared in the Sunday edition's opinion section alongside Henry's official corporate headshot. For readers who recognized his name, it was an unexpected personal revelation from a business leader known for maintaining strict privacy about his background. "Last weekend," Henry began, "I witnessed something at our local artisan market that reminded me why I got into the food business in the first place. It wasn't the excellent products on display, though there were many. It was watching a young woman maintain her dignity while being publicly humiliated for the crime of working hard and creating something beautiful." Henry went on to describe the scene at Evelyn's booth, but he provided context that no one at the market had possessed. He wrote about growing up in poverty in rural Mississippi, where his grandmother had supported their family by taking in washing and doing domestic work for wealthy families. "My grandmother made cookies very similar to the ones I encountered at that market," Henry continued. "She learned the recipe from a Vietnamese woman who worked alongside her cleaning houses in the 1960s. That woman had brought the recipe from her homeland and shared it with my grandmother during long days of scrubbing floors and washing clothes for families who barely acknowledged their existence." The essay revealed that Henry had immediately recognized the distinctive combination of flavors in Evelyn's cookies, not because they were copied from anyone else's work, but because they carried the authentic taste of a recipe that had traveled across cultures through relationships between working women who supported each other despite having very little themselves. When I saw Ms. Evelyn Tran being accused of theft for creating something that connected directly to my own family's history, I understood that I was witnessing something much larger than a dispute between competing bakers. I was seeing the same class-based cruelty that my grandmother endured, dressed up in contemporary clothes but fundamentally unchanged. Henry's essay continued with observations about the nature of authentic cultural food traditions and how they spread through communities of immigrants and working-class families, often without formal documentation or commercial recognition. The recipes that matter most are the ones passed down through generations of people who had no expectation of fame or profit. They survive because they connect us to home, to family, and to the understanding that food is love made tangible. But the most powerful section of the essay dealt with Evelyn's refusal of his business offer. "I offered Ms. Tran an opportunity to expand her operation because I genuinely believe in the quality of her work and the authenticity of her approach to baking. She declined that offer because she didn't want to succeed through sympathy rather than merit. That response taught me something important about the difference between charity and respect." Henry went on to describe how Evelyn's refusal had forced him to examine his own motivations and to understand that true support meant recognizing someone's existing value rather than trying to rescue them from their circumstances. Ms. Tran didn't need rescuing. She needed recognition. The incident at the market wasn't a tragedy that required intervention. It was an injustice that required correction. The essay concluded with Henry's announcement of a new initiative, the Authentic Artisan Partnership, a program that would identify exceptional small food producers and provide them with access to markets, resources, and customers without requiring them to give up independence or creative control. "This program isn't about charity or feel-good corporate responsibility," Henry wrote. It's about recognizing that the best food in America is often created by people working in small kitchens with limited resources but unlimited passion. Our job is to connect these artisans with people who appreciate what they create, not to change what they do or how they do it. The essay was reprinted in national business publications and shared widely on social media. Food bloggers and culinary professionals began discussing the broader issues Henry had raised about cultural appropriation, class dynamics in the food industry, and the value of authentic traditions over commercial success. But for Evelyn, reading the essay while sitting in her mother's kitchen, the most meaningful part was Henry's understanding of why she had declined his offer. She chose dignity over opportunity, Henry had written, and in doing so, she reminded me that the most valuable partnerships are between equals who respect each other's contributions. The response to the essay was immediate and overwhelming. By Monday morning, Evelyn's phone was ringing constantly with calls from food writers, restaurant owners, and potential customers who wanted to try the cookies that had inspired such a thoughtful reflection on food, culture, and justice. Orders began pouring in faster than Evelyn could possibly fulfill them. Local news stations requested interviews. Food bloggers wanted to feature her story. Several restaurants inquired about carrying her products. But perhaps most meaningfully, Evelyn received a handwritten note from Henry himself. "Dear Ms. Tran," he wrote, "I hope you understand that my essay wasn't intended to create publicity for your bakery. I wrote it because your response to both the market incident and my offer taught me something important about integrity and authentic success." He continued, "If you're ever interested in discussing ways to expand your operation while maintaining complete control over your creative vision, I would be honored to have that conversation. But only when and if you decide that expansion serves your goals, not mine." The note concluded, "I still owe you a proper visit to taste those cookies in their intended setting." Would next Tuesday afternoon be convenient? Evelyn set down the note and looked around her mother's small kitchen, which suddenly felt less like a place of hiding and more like the foundation for something she hadn't yet imagined. Outside, a line of customers had formed. People who had read Henry's essay and wanted to experience the cookies that had carried such powerful meaning across generations and cultures. For the first time since her mother's death, Evelyn felt like she might be ready to step beyond the safety of her small world without losing the values that had made it meaningful. What do you think of Evelyn's choice to stay gracious, even when she was insulted in front of everyone? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Hidden Heroine so you never miss inspiring stories like this one. 1 year later, Evelyn's bakery looked almost exactly the same from the outside. The modest storefront still bore the simple sign her mother had painted by hand 20 years earlier. The interior maintained the same warm, intimate atmosphere that had made neighborhood customers feel welcome for decades. But the small changes told the story of quiet growth and expanding impact. A new display case showcased items that had become signature offerings, including the almond cookies that had started everything. A small plaque by the register read, "Traditional recipes honored through careful hands," reflecting Evelyn's commitment to preserving her mother's legacy while making it accessible to new audiences. Behind the counter, Evelyn worked alongside 2 part-time employees, both women from the neighborhood who had approached her about learning traditional baking techniques. The arrangement allowed Evelyn to increase her production while maintaining the personal touch that customers valued. The authentic artisan partnership that Henry had announced in his essay had become a thriving program, supporting over 50 small food producers across the region. Evelyn served on the program's advisory board, helping to evaluate applications and ensure that selected artisans maintained creative control over their operations. Her own partnership with Graves Sustainable Foods had evolved into something neither she nor Henry had originally envisioned. Rather than operating a bakery at his corporate headquarters, Evelyn supplied a small selection of items to the company's employee cafe, with all products clearly labeled with her bakery's name and story. "It's perfect," Evelyn had told Henry during one of their quarterly planning meetings. "Your employees get access to items they couldn't find anywhere else, and I get a steady customer base without having to change anything about how I work." The arrangement had also led to unexpected opportunities. Several restaurants that sourced ingredients through Graves Sustainable Foods had discovered Evelyn's work and begun featuring her pastries on their dessert menus. Food critics had started including her bakery in guides to authentic ethnic cuisine. But perhaps most meaningfully, Evelyn had become a resource for other small food entrepreneurs, particularly women from immigrant families who were trying to build businesses around traditional recipes. On this particular afternoon, Evelyn was teaching 8-year-old Sophie Chen how to measure almond flour properly. Sophie's grandmother had asked Evelyn to work with the girl, who had shown unusual interest in baking and wanted to learn techniques that weren't taught in mainstream cooking classes. "Why did that lady hit you at the market?" Sophie asked suddenly, having heard fragments of the story from adult conversations. Evelyn paused in her demonstration, considering how to explain the incident in age-appropriate terms. "Sometimes people get scared when they see others doing good work," Evelyn said carefully. "They think there isn't enough room for everyone to succeed, so they try to push other people down instead of making their own work better." "But you didn't push back," Sophie observed. "No, I didn't. Do you know why?" Sophie thought for a moment. "Because pushing back would have made you just like her?" "Exactly. And because I knew that if I just kept doing good work and treating people with respect, the right people would notice." "Like the man who wrote about your cookies in the newspaper?" "Like Mr. Graves, yes. But also like your grandmother, who brings her friends here every week. And like Mrs. Rodriguez next door, who orders birthday cakes for her grandchildren. The people who matter most are often the ones who find you quietly, not the ones who make the most noise." Sophie nodded seriously, then returned her attention to measuring flour with the precision Evelyn had taught her. As the afternoon wound down and Evelyn prepared to close the bakery, she reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this moment. The incident at the market had felt like a humiliation at the time, but it had led to opportunities and relationships she could never have anticipated. More importantly, it had taught her that standing firmly in her values, even when it meant refusing attractive opportunities, had ultimately led to better opportunities that aligned with who she actually wanted to become. The small sign by the door captured what she had learned. Simple things can nourish a lifetime of memories. In the gentle rhythm of measuring, mixing, and baking that connected her to her mother's legacy and her community's needs, Evelyn had found a way to honor the past while building something sustainably new. Do you believe that just by standing firm, good people will see you? Please subscribe to Hidden Heroine, because women like Evelyn deserve to have their stories told forever.